The city never truly slept. Even when the sun went down, its eyes stayed open, glowing with streetlights and restless dreams. It breathed like a tired giant, inhale with hope, exhale with struggle. In this city, footsteps were hurried, voices were sharp, and hearts learned to harden early. Survival spoke louder than kindness here. If you slowed down to help someone, you risked being trampled. If you hesitated, the city moved on without you. It rewarded the bold with sudden chances and punished the weak with quiet suffering. Many arrived with prayers on their lips. Most learned quickly that prayers alone could not protect them. Dust rose from broken roads where sandals and worn shoes passed all day, while above them, glass buildings stretched toward the sky like proud trees that had forgotten their roots. Neon lights flashed promises of success, beauty, and easy wealth, mocking the old ways that once guided people by respect and patience. Elders' words struggled to survive beneath billboards shouting, "Buy more. Be more." The city had become a battlefield where the wisdom of ancestors fought a losing war against hunger and greed. Tradition walked slowly here, while desire ran fast and careless. In the markets, voices clashed like drums beaten too hard. Sellers shouted, buyers argued, and everyone watched everyone else with sharp eyes. On crowded buses, bodies pressed together, but hearts stayed far apart. Each face carried its own mission: money to earn, pride to protect, pain to escape. A woman guarded her basket like a treasure. A man counted his last coins with shaking fingers. Community had turned into competition. Helping another person felt like giving away your own breath. She grew up far from this noise, in a place where elders sat under old trees and spoke softly but firmly. They taught her that a person's name was more valuable than gold, and that shame lasted longer than hunger. Her grandmother would say, "A clean heart feeds you when the pot is empty." From them, she learned patience, how to wait without anger. She learned honesty, how to speak truth even when silence felt safer. These lessons settled deep inside her, shaping her steps and her choices. When she came to the city, she carried those village values like a small calabash of water in the desert. People laughed at her careful ways. "You think life is a storybook," one woman scoffed. Another shook his head. "Here, shortcuts are wisdom." She heard them, but she did not drop what she had been given. Even when the city laughed, even when hunger whispered temptation, she held on. She walked forward unarmed in a ruthless place, unaware that the city had already noticed her, and was preparing its test. Her dreams were small enough to fit inside her 2 hands. She did not ask the world for riches or loud praise. She wanted love that did not bruise, a home that did not shake with fear, and a name she could carry without shame. She wanted to rise slowly, like the sun, without burning her own soul. At night, when the city's noise softened, hope sat quietly beside her, whispering that patience still had meaning. Yet each morning, reality answered back with hunger, long walks, and doors that did not open easily. He was different in the eyes of the people. Wherever he went, heads turned. Men slapped his back, women smiled in his direction. He spoke well, laughed loudly, and carried himself like someone destined for greatness. But mirrors were cruel to him. When he was alone, his reflection reminded him of what he lacked. His smile hid a deep hunger, his confidence covered old shame, and behind his jokes lived a silent anger he never named. "Brother, you'll go far," people told him. He nodded, but inside he wondered how far a man could go when his pockets were always empty. Poverty followed him like an open wound. It never healed, only reopened itself each time he passed a shiny car or heard another man brag about success. He watched the wealthy with burning eyes, telling himself they were not better, just luckier. Still, he felt judged every day. Money spoke before he did. Without it, his words felt lighter, his dignity thinner. Slowly, he began to believe what the city taught him. Respect was something you bought, not something you earned. They found each other in hard times. When the world turned its back, they leaned on the same wall. They shared cheap meals and long walks, laughter born from nothing, and promises whispered under tired stars. "One day," he would say softly, "this life will change." She believed him, because belief was all she had to give. Their love was real, built from shared struggle, but it was fragile, like a clay pot drying in the sun, strong only if handled with care. Then the tone of his dreams began to change. He spoke less about patience and more about speed. About men who rose overnight. About doors that opened if you knew the right people. "There's no honor in suffering forever," he said one evening. She felt a tightness in her chest. "But some roads ask for too much," she replied gently. He waved it away with a smile, but something had shifted. Fast money began to sound sweeter than slow love. She grew quiet, her fears sitting heavy in her throat. The city listened closely, pleased to see another heart starting to crack. Whispers moved faster than the wind in this city. At every corner, behind closed doors, people spoke of him in hushed voices. No one said his name aloud unless necessary. He was a shadow larger than life, feared more than the law, feared more than elders who carried the weight of generations. Some said he owned more than property, he owned the fear of men. His power stretched through markets, offices, and even the quiet homes where children slept unaware. To mention him carelessly was to invite misfortune. He was the embodiment of unchecked power in a city that had forgotten mercy. He walked beside her, smiling in the sunlight, but the smiles were masks. Some nights, he lingered in places where the street's light could not reach, listening and waiting, moving quietly like someone already crossing a line he would never speak of. The weight of his choices pressed down on him in silence, and though she laughed, his eyes often drifted toward shadows where decisions were made and loyalty was tested. Something dark hovered over their lives, and though she did not yet see it, betrayal had begun its quiet work. Debt had grown around him like iron chains. Each morning, the numbers on paper and in voices pressed him closer, squeezing freedom from his chest. Money dictated his every step, turning small missteps into shame and hunger into judgment. He moved as if watched by invisible eyes, careful and calculating, yet the city judged him for every failure. Poverty had become a jailer, silent and unyielding, controlling not just his hands but his heart. At night, there were knocks. Quick taps at the door that made his breath catch. Shadows lingered beyond the windows. Lone sharks prowled like vultures, circling over promises unpaid and threats whispered low enough for only fear to hear. Sleep was no longer a refuge. Every creak of the floor, every rustle of wind, made his chest tighten. He lay awake, imagining faces in the dark and debts multiplying with each silent hour. During the day, laughter mocked him from the streets. Men he had known since childhood wore their riches like armor, pointing out his failures with sharp tongues. The shame was public, the humiliation raw. His friends measured respect in coins, and he found himself shrinking under their eyes. Each insult reminded him of his poverty and questioned his worth as a man. The city did not care for the honor of a man without money. The community watched, whispered, and weighed him as if his soul could be counted in coins. Every neighbor and acquaintance became a judge. Poverty was seen not as hardship but as laziness, a failure of character. He walked through the streets with a tight chest, feeling their eyes pierce him like arrows. Tradition demanded a man provide, yet the city gave him nothing but the heavy gaze of judgment. Hunger, debt, and public shame intertwined, leaving him wondering if dignity could survive in a world ruled by money. The city had a way of swallowing lessons whole. He remembered his father's voice, deep and steady beneath the village tree. "No shortcut can take you where patience cannot walk," the elder had said. And yet, here he was, in streets that promised the world to anyone bold enough to snatch it. The city applauded risk, whispered rewards for those willing to cheat, to lie, to bend the rules. Honor had become a faint song, drowned out by neon lights and the roar of engines. Inside him, the old teachings clashed with the pain of hunger, each step forward feeling like a betrayal of the past. One evening, a man with polished shoes and a smile as sharp as a knife approached him. "I can help you," he said smoothly, voice sweet like honey over stone. "You don't have to suffer anymore. There is money, respect, a life you only dream about." The words shone with promise, a candle in the darkness. He wanted to reach for it, to grasp the ease it offered. But every polite gesture carried hidden teeth, and he felt it. Danger coiled beneath the polished words, waiting. The favor became clear slowly, like a shadow growing at sunset. At first, it was only a suggestion, then a requirement, until the truth settled over him like smoke. She was part of the cost. His chest tightened. Each heartbeat screamed warnings he could not name aloud. Silence grew heavier than truth, pressing down like rain on a dry roof. He saw the line between right and wrong, once bold and clear, now smeared and thin under the weight of temptation. Love and hunger waged war inside him. Every thought of her stirred guilt, every thought of wealth brought longing. He feared losing her, feared losing everything he had not yet earned. Hunger for survival clawed at him, desire whispered that he could escape shame with one cruel choice. He wanted to hold both worlds, to protect love while seizing money, and the battle left him hollow, like a drum without skin. At night, he whispered excuses to himself. It is temporary. She will forgive me. Everyone sacrifices for survival. The lies tasted bitter, but they dulled the ache of conscience. The village voices in his mind, the elders' warnings, the ancestors' gentle reprimands, were blocked by a wall he had built of desperation. Each step toward betrayal seemed lighter when accompanied by self-deception, until he almost believed it was not betrayal at all. She trusted him, as she always had. When he asked her to meet him for what he called a small errand, she did not hesitate. Her trust was sacred, a fragile gift carried through years of shared struggles. She walked beside him, unaware that the streets around them had grown darker, that unseen hands were waiting. Every step she took was a thread in a tapestry she could not yet see unraveling. And when the shadow finally touched her, it was quiet, patient, unstoppable, a betrayal unfolding like night swallowing day. The men came silently, their presence like shadows stretching across the dusty street. He did not resist, though his hands trembled. She was guided forward with gentle but unyielding grips. Life itself felt diminished, reduced to numbers whispered behind closed doors. Each step toward them was a step away from dignity, a passage through the market of human value where people were currency and trust had no price. The city watched silently, as if understanding that some wrongs were larger than itself, and yet unable, or unwilling, to intervene. Her voice caught in her throat. Shock froze her like morning frost on a leaf. Fear was present, yes, but disbelief was heavier, pressing on her chest, stealing breath, and making her heart hammer in a rhythm of betrayal. She could not speak, could not cry, could only feel the hollowness of trust ripped from her. Her hands clenched, nails biting her palms, as if the pain of holding herself might anchor her soul from drifting entirely into despair. The betrayal was sharper than any knife, cutting not flesh but spirit. The one she loved, the one who had promised dreams under quiet stars, had traded her like a grain of rice for coins. The wound was spiritual, reaching deeper than blood or bruises, leaving her questioning the nature of people and the fairness of fate. Her innocence, once bright and unshakable, flickered like a candle in a storm, threatened by the wind of human greed. Then he appeared. Calm, measured, and terrifying without needing to shout. The crime lord's eyes were still, yet they held storms beneath the surface. Every gesture he made commanded obedience, every silence struck fear deeper than any raised voice could. He moved with a quiet authority that made even seasoned men shrink in the shadow of his presence. Around him, the air seemed to pulse with control, a reminder that power did not always roar, it often whispered, and the world listened. She was left in a gilded cage, golden bars that shone with opulence but weighed heavy with control. Her name felt smaller with every passing hour, her identity stripped to what others demanded she be. Isolation settled around her like a second skin, thick and unyielding. Comfort was meaningless when it came at the cost of freedom. Every luxury reminded her of the power that held her, and every command reminded her that humanity could be taken away, leaving only the hollow shell of existence. The city never forgives, and it never forgets. It feeds quietly on the dreams of those who wander its streets, consuming innocence like fire devours dry grass. Every neon light, every honking horn, every hurried footstep carries the scent of ambition, and the taste of those it will devour. In corners where laughter once lived, greed grows, spreading its shadow over alleys and rooftops. Children born with hope find themselves pawns, their bright hearts dimmed by walls of money, silence, and fear. The city is a predator, and the prey rarely knows the danger until it is too late. He counted the bills with shaking hands, the weight of the coins pressing like stones on his chest. Debts that had haunted him for months dissolved with a swipe of paper, the roar of calculators, and the approval of hidden hands. Relief was brief, replaced immediately by a strange emptiness. "I have done it. I am free," he whispered. But the freedom was a mirage. Every note he held carried a shadow of what had been taken. Money cleared the debts, yes, but it could not buy back the trust, the laughter, or the innocence now lost. Neighbors and acquaintances nodded at him, offering smiles that felt brittle, hollow. Cars gleamed at his name, bracelets and watches sparkled, and whispers of admiration followed him through markets and bars. Yet inside, a hollow rot gnawed quietly. Coins and cloth could not hide the weight pressing on his chest. The world admired a man who appeared victorious, but the man he saw in the mirror was haunted, hollowed, a stranger dressed in borrowed glory. Wealth had built walls, but it had also built a prison he could not escape. At night, sleep became a battlefield. He dreamed of her eyes, wide with disbelief, of hands trembling under the hands of strangers. Applause and admiration outside became meaningless as nightmares roared louder than any praise. Shadows followed him into the dark, whispering the truths he could not silence. Every corner of his home echoed with whispers of guilt. Pride had left him, replaced by a fear that would not rest. Even when he closed his eyes, he could not escape the echoes of the life he had traded. In the quiet of dawn, he heard the voices of the elders he had ignored, rising from memory like drums of judgment. A man who sacrifices another for coin sacrifices his soul, they said. The ancestors, once distant and silent, weighed heavily on him now. He noticed the suspicious looks of neighbors, the quiet judgment in marketplaces, the whispers that grew louder than any greeting. Morality, like a river long dammed, had returned with full force, pressing down on his chest, reminding him that no coin, no power, no admiration could wash away what he had done. She remembered the words of her grandmother, spoken under the shade of a mango tree long before the city swallowed her. The spirit is stronger than chains, child. Endure, and the world bends in your favor. Pain, fear, and anger had surrounded her like thick smoke, yet she drew breath and held fast. Survival was not in screams or rebellion, but in patience and discipline. Each insult, each command, each shadow that passed by became a test of her spirit. She allowed the suffering to sharpen her, to turn hurt into endurance, and despair into quiet resilience. In her cage of gold and shadows, she became like a bird learning the wind rather than pounding on the bars that confined it. Every movement outside her window, every glance from the guards, every whisper carried meaning. She learned patience in stillness, observing without fear, noting without judgment. Where others rushed and stumbled, she waited, learning the patterns, the rhythms of life that she could bend to her favor when the time came. Her quiet became strength, her eyes, a library of knowledge no one suspected. She watched silently as secrets unfolded before her. Conversations, mistakes, hesitations, all revealed truths without a single word from her. The men around her moved with arrogance, assuming that power made them invisible, untouchable. And yet, every gesture, every glance betrayed weaknesses. She catalogued them in her mind, weaving a map of loyalty, fear, and desire, knowing that knowledge gained through patience is sharper than the sharpest blade. The network that had ensnared her was vast and intricate, like a river with hidden tributaries. She saw how fear flowed through the ranks, how loyalty was bought and demanded, and how authority was exercised with subtle gestures, silent glances, and whispered names. Even walls that seemed impenetrable had cracks, and even the strongest men stumbled under pressure they could not see coming. Each observation allowed her to understand the rhythm of the beast, its strengths and its hidden weaknesses. Beneath the towering presence of the crime lord, she saw the roots that failed to reach deep. A tree that appeared unshakable revealed shallow foundations when the wind of scrutiny blew against it. Power was a mask, and behind it lay fragility hidden from all but the patient observer. Every guard's hesitation, every subordinate's whispered complaint, every unspoken tension marked the weak roots she could someday exploit. The mighty, she realized, could be unmade with knowledge, patience, and the strength of a spirit that refused to break. Whispers traveled faster than the wind. Across the city, rival gangs sensed weakness, their leaders circling patiently like lions smelling blood in the water. Streets that once trembled under a single hand now shook with anticipation. Violence, once controlled and silent, began to leak into open spaces. Every unguarded corner, every faltering guard, every hesitation in the ranks became an invitation. The mighty fall when the brave wait too long, an old street prophet had said, and now the prophecy moved quietly among alleys and markets. Sirens cried in the distance, the law drawing closer like a tide that could not be stopped. Even within walls of steel and glass, fear seeped into the crime lord's men. Paranoia replaced calm, and orders meant to hold power together began to crumble. Every glance became a question, every step measured, every breath a risk. "Trust no one," muttered a lieutenant to another, eyes darting as shadows deepened around them. The city, long silent in judgment, was now awake, and even the strongest feared its gaze. Inside the crime lord's compound, loyalty frayed at the edges. Greed and fear ate through the inner circle, whispering betrayal like a pestilence. The men who had once stood shoulder to shoulder now watched each other with suspicion, ready to strike before being struck. Power turned inward, devouring itself in silence. Plans formed in secret corners, eyes flicked to every gesture, and small mistakes became sparks threatening to ignite a larger fire. The empire that had seemed unshakable now trembled, and even the Lord himself could sense the cracks beneath his feet. She watched quietly, unseen yet present in every calculation. Each observation, each note passed or overheard, shifted the balance in ways no one suspected. A phrase whispered here, a hesitation noted there. Small truths began to unravel the careful tapestry of control. The hands that once seemed steady were now shaking, decisions faltering, strategies exposed. One woman's silence, born of patience and discipline, became a silent instrument of justice, tipping scales that no single fist or weapon could touch. The ancestors stirred. In the quiet moments between plans and whispers, the weight of fate pressed down. African wisdom teaches that injustice awakens consequences, and the city itself seemed to breathe with moral balance. No shadow lasts forever, no cruelty escapes the measure of destiny. The crime lord's reign, built on fear and deceit, felt the first tremors of retribution. Somewhere beyond sight, unseen forces moved with precision, ensuring that evil, no matter how bold, eventually cracks under the watchful eyes of ancestors who do not forget. The coins he had once craved now lay heavy in his hands, gleaming but hollow. Gold that promised freedom now tasted like ash on his tongue. He counted it again and again, hoping some piece of pride might remain, but emptiness replaced every ounce of satisfaction. "I have all I wanted," he whispered to the walls, yet even his voice sounded foreign. Peace could not be bought, respect could not be forced, and the laughter of others only reminded him that he had traded what mattered most for a fleeting illusion. The wealth that had promised triumph now mocked him in silence. The shadows he once commanded now loomed over him. Friends became threats, protection turned into suspicion, and every step he took seemed tracked by eyes that once followed his orders. Fear replaced control, whispering that his world, built on blood and betrayal, could devour him as easily as he had devoured trust. "They do not forget," he muttered, heart pounding. The criminal world he had fed, nurtured, and feared now sharpened its teeth on him. In the city's crowded streets, he became a man without a name. Whispers replaced greetings. Eyes that once admired now averted. His reflection in store windows seemed a stranger staring back. Respect, identity, and belonging slipped through his fingers like grains of sand. In a world loud with ambition and wealth, he became invisible, a ghost among the living, remembered only for a single act of cruelty he could never undo. It came to him in the quiet hours, unrelenting and absolute. He had sold more than a woman. He had sold his own soul, the essence of who he was, the very dignity that elders had taught him to protect. Regret arrived like a tide too late to turn, flooding every corner of his being. "What have I done?" he whispered to empty rooms, and even the city offered no answer but its indifferent noise. Fate, however, has a way of weaving paths that no man can predict. Their paths crossed again, not with tenderness, not with reconciliation, but with the weight of truth pressing down. She stood taller, eyes steady, voice calm. He, hollowed and fearful, recognized the reversal of roles. The girl he had betrayed now held the power he had sought. Time had revealed the balance of justice, and in that moment, neither could speak of love, only of what had been lost and what now could not be undone. She stood at the center of the hall, calm yet unyielding. The chains of fear that had bound her for so long were gone. Her eyes, once lowered in obedience, now met every gaze with quiet authority. Around her, the city's predator trembled. The boyfriend, once a partner in shadow, now stood exposed and unprotected, stripped of his ill-gotten power. The balance had shifted, subtle yet undeniable. Walls that had seemed immovable now revealed cracks, and whispers across the streets told the same story. The powerless had learned to stand tall. No words passed between them, yet the silence was deafening. Every glance, every measured step, spoke volumes. He felt the weight of his guilt in her steady gaze, recognition in her stance, yet forgiveness never arrived. She did not raise a finger in anger, did not demand explanations. The act of standing firm, of surviving with dignity, became louder than any cry he could muster. Justice arrived without cruelty. There was no need for revenge, no desire to humiliate. The city itself seemed to hold its breath as consequences were delivered with clarity. African wisdom whispered that truth needs no embellishment, that balance restored quietly is stronger than rage unleashed. He saw the lesson, bitter but undeniable: wrongs acknowledged, power measured, and morality restored without the cost of vengeance. The drum of fear fell silent. The crime lord's authority, once echoing in every alley and boardroom, now dissolved into emptiness. The streets, long held in a chokehold of terror, breathed freely. Silence replaced the cries that had once announced domination. Power, built on fear, had no ground to stand on. As dawn broke, the city revealed its secrets. Law enforcement moved steadily, uncovering hidden crimes, dragging darkness into the clarity of daylight. Men who had smiled behind masks were exposed. Lies that had seemed safe were brought into the open. The streets shimmered with truth, and the air itself seemed cleansed. Nothing could hide anymore, and the city, a living witness, bore the lessons that those who abuse power will eventually face the light. The betrayal that had lain like a shadow within the crime lord's walls now turned on itself. Friends who had whispered loyalty in dark corners drew knives, literal and figurative, against one another. Every deal once secured with promises of blood and gold became a weapon aimed at the back of a brother. Greed, like a fire in dry grass, consumed its own, leaving ruins where unity had once pretended to exist. "You thought power could save you," one murmured as another fell into disgrace. "The same hunger that built us now eats us alive." The city, long shackled by whispers and fear, began to breathe. People stepped from behind their doors with cautious smiles, aware that the terror that once ruled their streets had lost its grip. There was celebration, yes, but it was tempered by memory, the memory of lives crushed under the weight of unchecked cruelty. Mothers hugged children tighter, market vendors spoke in hushed relief, and the streets carried a tension of hope and vigilance alike. Proof had arrived. Cruelty may rise, but it cannot endure. She walked free, the weight of chains removed but the marks of their bite still on her spirit. Every step was a reclamation of life, a quiet assertion that survival had shaped her strength. The city had tried to swallow her, but she had learned the wind within the cage, and now the cage was gone. Eyes that once feared her were met with calm authority, a voice that had trembled now held conviction. Pain remained, yes, but it was the forge in which her courage had been tempered. Stepping into the morning sun, she felt the warmth as if for the first time. Her shadow stretched behind her, a reminder of endurance and endurance alone. Each breath was hers, each heartbeat a testament to having endured what many could not imagine. The streets she had walked in fear now knew her as a survivor. The world had tried to break her, yet she returned, unbowed, her heart changed but her spirit intact. Survival was quiet, but it was victory. The streets whispered in cautious tones as people watched her pass. Some lowered their heads in respect, others tilted theirs in suspicion. Mothers clutched their children tighter, remembering the dangers that had lurked unseen, while young men murmured admiration behind cupped hands. Gossip mixed with awe, yet silence carried weight, shaping public opinion in ways louder than any shout. An elder muttered under his breath, "She walks taller than the city dares to allow." The crowd held its breath, unsure whether to pity her scars or honor the courage that bore them. Judgment, in this city, always wore the face of tradition. She moved with quiet grace, each step a testament to resilience. Pain had clawed at her, yet her spirit remained unbroken. In the reflection of glass and puddles, the world saw not weakness, but dignity surviving betrayal. Her eyes, steady and unwavering, carried the unspoken message: suffering may bend the body, but it cannot enslave the soul. Children watched, wide-eyed, learning that hope is not born from comfort, but from the strength to endure when all seems lost. He stood apart, hands empty where gold once gleamed. The streets that had once murmured his name in admiration now whispered of caution, of shame. The power he had chased had vanished, leaving only a hollow echo of authority and respect. Friends turned away, and rivals smirked behind closed doors. Isolation pressed against him like a physical weight, and for the first time, he felt the emptiness of wealth gained through dishonor. He whispered into the wind, words trembling with guilt, "I have taken more than I can give back." But the wind offered no solace. No apology could restore what had been broken, no confession could mend the trust lost. The knowledge that some wounds are permanent settled deep in his chest, and he understood that certain debts could never be repaid in coin or speech. The elders gathered in their quiet council, nodding to the rhythm of justice as life itself unfolded the consequences. Forgiveness could be offered by tradition, they said, but accountability could not be erased. No vengeful hand was needed. The balance of life delivered its own measure. He would live knowing that his choices carried weight, that every act of betrayal bore a price, and that mercy existed only where lessons were learned, not where wrongdoing was excused. Coins might glint, but they could not shine over a hollow heart. His wealth, once a shield, now lay empty in his hands. Status symbols could not fill the void left by dishonor. Every trophy he had acquired whispered its lie. Money does not mend the soul. The emptiness that accompanied his triumph was louder than any applause, and he felt it in every waking hour and sleepless night. The city pulsed onward, indifferent to the individual dramas that had unfolded within it. Markets opened, buses rattled, children laughed, and life moved forward. The story of betrayal, resilience, and justice would become part of the hum of the streets, a memory carried in the rhythm of daily existence. Personal pain wove itself into communal history, known by few but remembered by all who listened. Elders gathered the children and spoke of her courage, of the man who had lost his way, and of the power of endurance. These tales became warnings, protective stories passed down through voices that had survived countless generations. "Remember," they said, "the city may tempt, but your soul belongs to you alone." Memory became armor, and storytelling a shield. And in the final telling, the truth echoed through the alleys and over rooftops. Those who trade others for gold will first trade themselves into darkness. Greed may shine bright for a moment, but it devours from within. The lesson settled, deep and unyielding, in the hearts of all who heard it, a moral as enduring as the African sun and as sharp as the wind that cuts across the plains.